Good evening, everybody. How you doing? I'm Rick Hirsch, managing editor of the Miami Herald, and on behalf of the Herald and the Miami Design Preservation League, welcome tonight to tonight's community conversation. Some quick notes on why we're here this evening and who we have to thank. First, a large group of Miami Herald folks created the stories marking the 30-year anniversary of Miami Vice's debut. Some of them are here today, some not. Andres Figlucci, Maddie Marr, Howard Cohen, Dave Barry, Karen Burkett, Emily Michaud, Cara DePina, Monica Leal, and the maestro who put all of this together for us, editor Amy Driscoll. You can read those stories if you haven't already at our website, miamiherald.com. We also have a website called flashbackmiami.com where you can take a photo tour of Miami Vice, all of those great pictures from 1984 and 85 and 88, as well as many other important moments in South Florida history. We also owe a debt to the Miami Design Preservation League, the organization that led the effort to create the Miami Beach Historic District, and MDPL is our host tonight. In particular, its outreach director, Judith Frankel, and facilities manager, Richard Tower. This wonderful space we're in is in the process of being transformed into the brand new Art Deco Museum. You got a sneak peek tonight, feel really special. It officially opens on October 10, that's a week from tomorrow. So please come back to get the full experience. A large part of MDPL's mission is to educate the public about Miami Beach's architectural heritage, and this museum is one important way they fulfill that mission, and it's free. Speaking of free, we'd like to thank the Clevelander, also a sponsor tonight. When you leave, and you can't leave till the end, you will get a free drink ticket that is good for one Miami Vice cocktail. So, only one and only a Miami Vice cocktail. 30 years ago this month, if you were inside this building on an early Thursday evening, you might be pushing a walker. You might be seeking shelter. If you weren't, you'd probably be thinking about getting out of here really soon because South Beach was a different place after dark than it is now. Some people called it Heaven's Waiting Room. The Herald once called it the place where dreams die. But many of the Art Deco treasures up and down this street were retirement homes or flea-back hotels. Some were crack dens. The building you know as Casa Casarino or the Versace Mansion was an apartment house called the Amsterdam Palace, with rent so cheap that entry-level reporters at the Miami Herald could afford to live there. And as Dave Barry would say, I'm not making that up. When the first Miami Vice episode debuted in September 1984, the city of Miami Beach leaned more towards demolition than preservation. And many Miamians feared that a show about crime would only make the region's shop-worn image worse. And then the Vice effect happened. So, or not. No, we need an audio check. We're gonna reload and try again. Okay, as we said a few minutes ago, everybody's here. What could go wrong? That's right. If you're watching the live stream, nothing's happening right now. Still need more. Thanks. Okay, and now I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation, the afternoon news anchor with the WLRN Miami Herald News, somebody who covered this town for the last 20 years, right? Kelly Mitchell.
Thank you so much, Rick, and thanks everybody for coming. Have you ever seen a bunch of journalists, hardcore, seasoned, hard-nosed, get so excited by a TV show? It just doesn't happen. That's just not our method of operation. But I have to tell you, there was something that changed everyone's perception about this place. And I lived in Detroit at the time in 1984 when this show started, and we felt so sorry for you. Now the shoe's on the other foot. But I think this summer when we first started talking about, and the realization dawned on everyone that, you know what? It really was 30 years ago. And this really did change the face and the look of this whole area. And people were drawn to it suddenly. It had its heyday a long, long time ago, but those days had since passed. And somehow, some way, when it got on the little screen, not even the big screen, let's face it, nobody liked the movie. When it got on the little screen, there was something that just lit up and you wanted to be there. So we thought tonight, what were the things that made Miami Vice so special? There was fashion, there was architecture, and of course there were fitting the perfect parts to the perfect people who somehow encapsulated what Miami was becoming, and finding people that I think Lori will begin to tell you that have gone on to do things that you probably don't even remember that they were in Miami Vice. But we've all had such a great time putting this together, and the fact that you've enjoyed it enough to come be with us this evening, we just can't thank you enough for being Vice baby with us, if that's okay. So let me bring up our panel members who were kind enough to vacate the premises while we showed Karen Burkett Rundlet's lovely video that she's worked so hard on. The thing about this that was great, and having been in newsrooms really pretty much all my life, you don't find a lot of happy stories. And there was something about this whole 3-month process that we all sort of got into the swing of things and really enjoyed it. And I know I did a story for WLRN with Howard talking specifically about the music. And if you want to ask Howard questions about music, he's your guy, trust me. But I had to go find some of the old things on YouTube. And WLRN is NPR. Very nice people, love them to death. But when I started cranking up some of the music that I had to download and I started playing it really loudly, you should have seen them gravitate toward my studio. And for 2 hours, we just weren't NPR anymore. We were Miami Vice, and we were loving it. So let me introduce our panel tonight. We have Mike Knurk, who is a Herald alum. He also has ties to the new museum, the Design Preservation League, and he also can sit anywhere he wants because he is coming up here to enjoy. And also his specialty is going to be on the architecture side and some of the things that led South Beach to begin to look like it was portrayed on the show. We have Lori Wyman, who you saw featured in the video that it took us a while to get going, but when we did, it was darn well worth it. And she is casting, Lori Wyman casting. Have a seat wherever you would like. And the other thing that was so great about this show was the fashion. And unlike polyester suits, leisure suits, I don't think anybody is embarrassed that they dress like Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas. I sort of think that look still holds today. So we have Barbara Lanicki, who is a fashion designer and an interior designer and a bit of a star in her own right. And she's going to kind of weigh in on how the look translated into clothes and how it translated into how we decorated our homes. So we're going to let them get mic'd up, which we...
Are we on? Hello? Yeah.
Hello, testing, 1, 2, 3.
We're on.
If we're good here, I think, Lori, you want to pick it up and explain to our audience some of the things that you had to go looking for in order to be representative of shows that really weren't like they are today. You did not, it was still pretty much, you know, your average white guy. This was not a casting appearance by average white guys. You really went and found people who represented what Miami was beginning to look like. How did you go about doing that?
Well, today we have something called the internet. So today it's a lot easier to find people. Back then, I would find the usual way is to contact the talent agents. That's normally how you find people. But you don't normally find, or in that day, you didn't normally find the drug dealer looking kind of guys because they weren't actors. And the people who were actors back then did mostly commercials. They didn't normally do this sort of thing. So they were the clean cut Caucasian guys, like they looked like Ken dolls. And that's not what we looked for. So I found people in very, very interesting places. And I would just approach people wherever I was. And I thought, well, where would this type of person hang out? I went to 12-step meetings and found people there because they'd have the right look, but I knew they'd be responsible enough to show up. And I was very resourceful. And it was interesting because oftentimes I would be approached by people who worked on the crew of Miami Vice, and they would say, "You have to see my friend." And they would introduce me to people who reeked from all kinds of things. and I remember one of the guys, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I thought, oh, wow, it was vile. And I ran into him 20 years later, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And I did remember him. I have a pretty good memory. And I said, "Oh, yes, I remember you." And he said, "I want you to know I've been clean and sober for 15 years. And I was like, "Good, because you reeked something fierce when you auditioned for me." But I would go wherever I would be in Publix, and I would see somebody who had a really great look, and I'd say, "Excuse me." And of course it sounded like a line, "Hi, would you like to be on Miami Vice?" And "Sure, lady," and a lot of people didn't take me up on it. They wouldn't call me back. And so I got to a point where I'd say, "Here's my phone number, and if you're interested, you contact me." Excuse me. And what I found, though, was because of the success of the show, people contacted me from all over the world. And that's true. I got letters and pictures from all over the world. I want to be on your show. I want to be on your show. Headshots and resumes. So it made it a little bit easier. Also, something that was a lot easier back then than now, I do a lot of the episodic television. In the last few years, I've been very, very fortunate. I did Burn Notice, The Glaze, Magic City, Graceland. I'm currently doing the Netflix show that's shooting in the Keys. And because of the way that television goes now, once you use somebody on episode number 3 of season number 1, that's it. No more. You can't use them anymore because of the fact that you can TiVo it and you can rewatch it 27 times. But back then, during Miami Vice days, once you aired that program, it was done. That person was. So I was fortunate enough that everybody I used on season 1, I could use them on season 2, and I could use them on season 3, and I did. You know, like I had one friend, actor friend, yeah, I died 10 times on my, you know, as different characters because we used them over and over and over again. You put a wig on him, put a mustache on him, made him look different, sunglasses. So we were, in a way, I kind of liked it better back then because if you use somebody who was really good for a smaller role, you could use them again. But now they don't do that.
And you know, there's truth to that because right now, I think it's 2.5 Men. They brought back a character as somebody else. And I'm sitting there thinking, but you can't be that person because you were that person.
And we're not technically allowed now to do it unless I prove that they were edited out or they've changed their look drastically or they were in the shadows and you can't tell that it was really them, you know, originally. But otherwise, that's it. But Vice was great. Vice, we used them. People worked every year. There were actors down here who worked every single season.
Well, I want you to get a mental list going, and we'll come back to you on some of the names that people
wonderful names. Okay.
will know now, but know from other things. Like I think Schindler's List, if I'm not mistaken, there's somebody very famous who was on Miami Vice during that time period. So she'll dazzle you with the knowledge of the people that she knows. Michael, we were just talking before everybody came in, and we got a bit of news this week that we knew was really coming. Tobacco Road is going to be closing. Yeah, a little sooner than we thought. And we knew it was coming, but it's about a year early. And I put on Facebook last night because, you know, why not? That if people always thought like that and had not looked to preserve the history, there would not be a South Beach. And it took people with vision like Michael to sort of look at what it could become. And I think a lot of what happened with Miami Vice was to show people who might be a little weary of trying to get these things going. When they saw it on TV, suddenly their ideas were brilliant. What did this mean for some of the buildings that are now still here that wouldn't be otherwise?
Well, I'm on this panel because obviously I think Miami Vice is a key factor. After Barbara Kaplan, who saw the Art Deco district in her mind a decade before anyone else could figure it out, I think this most important thing that happened to the Art Deco district where we are now was Miami Vice. Miami Vice came on the television and arrested everyone. It was dramatic, it was stunning. It was nothing they had ever seen before. This is kind of what Art Deco was in the 20s. It was radically different. In fact, I think there's a great similarity. Lori was talking about on this interview, there was nothing quite like the 80s, but actually there was. It was called the Roaring 20s, and that's where Art Deco came out of, and that's when Miami Beach was first a famous tourist place. But by the 1980s, Miami Beach was nowhere to go, and when Dennis and I moved here in '86, all of our friends said, "You're moving where?" But and '86 was almost the end of Miami Vice, and still the locals hadn't caught on to what the world had seen. The first time I went to London, it was 1980, and on the television was this American program called Dallas, and everybody was in Europe was raving about it. The second time I went to London, it was 1989, and what was on the BBC? Miami Vice. And all of Europe was agog about Miami, and it took the United States middle country, Nebraska, Kansas, Indiana, Ohio, 5 more years to catch up. But they loved that throbbing beat. Miami Vice was in stereo. I went out and bought a stereo television receiver just about purely so I could hear the soundtrack of Miami Vice. Stereo television was new in 82, 83. The show started in 84. But Barbara Capitman, the founder of the Miami Design Preservation League, had a very respectful and healthy relationship with the show's main creator, Michael Mann. And they admired each other from a distance. And we, growing up in that developing period of the Art Deco district, didn't quite realize what a worldwide impact it was going to have in the future. We were just going to the parties, and we were going to shootings of Miami Vice.
The good kind.
We watched people be thrown out the window 20 times until they got it right. And I was amazed how fast they could put this plastic shatter window back in place for the next take. Am I not?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear him?
I'm used to talking in this room since this is the Preservation League.
He projects.
Well, to summarize on that, there were a few things that had gotten people's attention before Michael Mann arrived. Andrew Capitman, the son of Barbara, had come and started the Art Deco Hotels Company, which was way ahead of its time and eventually went broke. But they started really the first restaurant on Ocean Drive, which was the Cafe Cardozo. But the second thing they opened was the Carlisle Grill across the street from the Cardozo. And Miami Vice actually filmed there many times. It was one of the only restaurant, bar, clubs that they didn't have to invent fictitiously. We went to a scene in the Waldorf Towers they were filming with Isai Morales, an episode called God's Word. And that episode was a club that was completely made up. The club didn't really exist. But the Carlisle Grill, which is just up the street, was really there. And that was because of the Capitman family. Barbara's co-founder of the league was Leonard Horowitz, and he had been painting these buildings like a makeup artist does to Hollywood.
There you go.
Oh, it wasn't on? I'll just talk loud. I'm almost wrapped up because we need to hear from Barbara. Leonard's cover of Progressive Architecture magazine was groundbreaking and attracted a lot of attention, including people like Andy Warhol. That was in November '82. The next thing that happened is Christo came and did the Surrounded Islands. And that had a huge impact in the art world, but it didn't showcase the Art Deco district. But everyone who worked on Surrounded Islands stayed in the Art Deco hotels right along Ocean Drive, the Carlisle, the Cardozo, the Victor, the Oceanfront Apartments. The Surrounded Islands was entirely headquartered in the Art Deco hotels on Ocean Drive. And they were so happy, just like the people in Vice were happy to be here every day. And then at that Christo Surrounded Islands was in May '83, and that finally brings us up to when Vice came on the scene. Also, the Miami City Ballet was founded right in that time, and the New World Symphony started. And they bought, New World Symphony, of course, bought the Plymouth Hotel, which was the first poster is it here in the museum? The first poster ever done of the Art Deco district was the Plymouth Hotel, where the New World Symphony had its start. So Miami Vice came along after a lot of us had been working really hard and had known that we had something very special, but the world didn't know. Barbara taught us that publicity and promotion was the key to the success of selling, of making anything successful. And she had learned that in the 30s and 40s, and she knew it very well when she came here. So when Miami Vice came, she and Michael Mann hit it off, and she maybe whispered advice to him about her favorite buildings. Then they would look at them and say, oh, yeah, and then they would paint it, and then it was fine. There's one of the best episodes of the Painted Building was when they did a sex shop in the Club Ovo, which was the Warsaw Ballroom. Dennis and I were driving along Washington Avenue one day, and we saw the front doors had been converted to female breasts. And we just
That's so Warsaw.
slammed on the brakes and almost wrecked the car. That's Collins. Sorry, Collins. I said Washington. That's enough for, that brings us.
That gets
right
us
up to
started.
80 to 84, 85, 86.
And Barbara, I guess we were pink before pink was cool. What effect did this have on not just what we wore, and sometimes really still do because it's comfortable here, but also how we lived? I mean, we dressed up our homes to look like Miami Vice.
It was very interesting because I think it was the only police station inside the police station that was pale pink as well. So it was really kind of
And I don't think
helpful.
we're gonna give Barbara this microphone.
Yeah.
And- 'cause I know that one works.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I came to Miami sort of at the end of Miami Vice, almost, a few. I was asked to come over for 6 months by Ronnie Wood to do a hotel up, 6 months, and 2 years later, it turned into a nightclub, and we're still working, and I really never left. It was really a very interesting time. And that was right in the middle of all this fun and organic change on Miami Beach. It was very interesting.
What would you identify as the single biggest fashion influence that came out of that show?
It was very much a boy show to start off with. I mean, I can't remember any women in it at all. But,
Right.
I believe the clothes were done by Versace, who had just opened a shop in the Mayfair in Coconut Grove. And I mean, pale pink jackets for men was sort of unheard of, and pale blue, using the two colors together. And it's the way they wore them, is the sort of scrunched up sleeves and no socks and open down to the waist. And the hair got longer and longer in the shows and more blowy in the winds.
And now we're back to the Don Johnson scruffy look again.
Yeah. Yes, well, it's sort of more beardy, bristle. They were very clean shaven, no.
But do you think that this particular type of fashion held up for the years?
It comes in and out, yes. It's very much a Miami look, I think. I don't think you would wear pale pink in London, a jacket in pale pink.
What about the interiors of homes? How did this impact the way we decorate?
Usually the interiors follow fashion, so it was a real natural event for it to move into the house. And I think, after working at Woody's, I was asked to work on Chris Blackwell's hotels, and he very much wanted everything in Jamaican colors, and I got into a lot of trouble with the city. Because what we used to do is just do tiny little swatches of color and write the number and then get it signed in the city by somebody, and then start painting. It was very much stronger than Barbara Capitman's colors. And somebody would come charging from the city saying, "What are you doing?" I said, "Sorry, you signed it." But they got used to it.
And you signed off on it.
Yeah.
So you're stuck with it. Now, we also want to open questions from the audience. This is your chance to relive it and bring up some things that maybe we haven't even thought of that come to top of mind. You walked in, I thought, oh my gosh, it's Don Johnson. And thank you, Don, for coming. We worked for months to get you there, and no, we're not paying you $30,000. But be sure if you do want to ask a question, raise your hand and I'll get the microphone over to you. And as you're thinking of what you might wish to ask, Lori, give us a laundry list, if you will, of some of the people She's in production. She knows she has a microphone. Give
Right
us a
here.
laundry
Hello.
list of some of the people who we may not remember who really were part of this history.
There were a lot. I mean, we met, now, of course, in hindsight, I wish I had had all of them sign my scripts, but who knew? I remember this one kid, because we were all kids. Is this back? Are you getting back? We were all kids. I say kids, 20s, early 30s. And I'm not sure. I know I can probably just talk without it altogether. But there was this kid who came in, and he had just done a movie, but it hadn't come out yet. And I said, oh, that's cool. What's the name of the movie you did? He goes, I played John Belushi. The movie's called Wired. And that, of course, is Michael Chiklis. And nobody knew who Michael Chiklis was. It's funny because I was talking to the girls who work in the office with me, and I said, do you realize we met Julia Roberts? And they were like, no. And of course, I have the typed lists of everybody that we brought in, because we would do the cast list. So I brought it out one day. I'm like, let's see who we've met that we don't even remember. Helena Bonham Carter played Don Johnson's drug-addicted wife.
That was the role I wanted.
I'm sorry. And Sheena Easton, little Sheena Easton. Sheena Easton was the hardest handshake I've ever had by a human being. I thought she was going to break every bone in my hand. And James Brown, and he had to sign his contract. He couldn't write. He didn't know how to, couldn't write. So he sat down and we said, you need to sign your contract. He's like, I don't know how to write my name, and we're like, how do you write your name? And he goes, got an X. That's how James Brown signed his contract, with an X. He couldn't write. And the people that we met were amazing. Bruce Willis did a Miami Vice, and these were before these guys. Everybody has to start somewhere, and
got killed off. Is that because she crushed your hand?
no, but let me tell you that Sheena Easton and Demi wasn't on Vice. I did another movie. She was the other bone crusher. 2 females, never a man, always a female. And we saw the people who worked on that, and there were people that they rejected, because as a local casting director, we would bring in local people, and we needed musicians. We always brought in musicians, and we brought in this unknown musician by the name of Juan Cicada. And they rejected Juan Cicada. And then, of course, he went on to become John Cicada, and it's like, we thought he was good. I don't know. But it was amazing how many people. I brought this one guy in. His name, I'd met him in a class in Tampa. His name was Asif Mandiwala. And he was great. He was a great actor. Well, now I was looking in the Herald, and Asif Mandvi is on the Jon Stewart show, the Daily Show, right? Jon Stewart. And it's like, look at Asif. Wow, look what he's done. Because everybody has to start somewhere. And Miami Vice was the greatest springboard for a lot of actors to work on something that was so gritty. It was shot like a little movie. Television wasn't shot that way back then. And now, you see the handheld cameras. It's very exciting to watch. But back then, it wasn't like that.
We saw some of the shots of where they're on the tracks and
Right.
the cameras go by.
The dolly shows.
Anybody who is in a really successful show, that runs for 9 or 10 years, like Cheers, like Friends, those types of shows will tell you, and Mary Tyler Moore, it's why they cry in the final episode, because they do become such a family. This was only 5 years, but what was the mood like on the set? Because it wasn't a comedy per se, but was it a fun place to work, to be on Miami Vice? Was it serious? Was everybody just so hot? They really
Don't
didn't
you
care?
record that. Turn that off.
What would you describe the mood on a Miami
You're gonna get in
Vice?
trouble, baby.
A Miami Vice shoot.
Exhausting. grueling, hard,
How many hours a day?
a lot. A lot. It was they were long days, but that's what television is. Television are long days. There's a lot to get done. And then you have to deal with things. Like Barbara was saying before, didn't it ever rain in Miami when we were shooting Miami Vice? Because you never saw that. So of course, if it rained, everything had to stop. So you might have to sit for a while. And you know, these poor people would be called to the set at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you didn't need them till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Why did they need to do that? I don't know.
Now, there wasn't a South Beach,
No.
obviously. Where did people go places afterwards? Did they get together? Did they have a Miami Vice?
I know
cocktail?
Tobacco Road was a place.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there were a bunch of little dives around here. There were a bunch of little dives because they're really Club Deuce. Yeah.
Miami Vice filmed it.
Yeah, we did. But there was also, I think, at the end of the night, everybody just went home.
You're just tired. But they were fun. Just grueling, frankly.
Yeah, it was hard. It was exciting, but yet every Friday night at 9 o'clock, we were all in front of our television sets. They were filming because Friday night was always. Productions always film Friday night because then they can get off of work at 6 o'clock Saturday morning and then recuperate all weekend. So Friday night is a very popular night to film if they're going to film at night during the week. But for our department, our casting department, we'd be done by 7:30, 8 o'clock and run home and put our VCRs on and put our VHS tapes in, you know. I'd run by Kmart and buy a pack of 3, put it in and videotape my episodes.
And Mike, what would you say? The structures were intact, but describe what they really looked like before the little facade paint jobs. You know, what were people seeing when they would come down here? The bones were good, but the dressing wasn't.
Well, there were these rules from the concept. The most important one was no earth tones.
Right.
No earth tones. That held for seasons 1, 2, 3. There were 5 seasons. They eventually got tired of pastels and they totally changed the colors and got darker in the season 4 and 5. Also in season 4, NBC in its infinite wisdom moved the show from 10 p.m. Friday to 9 p.m. against Dallas, which was the beginning of the end. But also they went to dark colors then and the scripts got darker. And I think Michael Mann lost interest and went back to Hollywood to work on movies, basically. But when the show started, and we said this before, nobody had ever seen anything like it. As proof of that, it was nominated for an unprecedented 15 Emmys on the first season. And nobody had seen anything like it. Nobody had heard anything like it. Also, people commenting on the show have said the real star of Miami Vice was the Art Deco district.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually very true. And like all great Hollywood lighting experts, makeup experts, costume designers, the Art Deco district was made to look fabulous by Miami Vice. And those buildings were not fabulous looking. They were fabulous architecture, but very few people could see that because they were so seedy, so run down. They were crack houses. They were $9 a night.
Wow.
They smelled bad. But if you stood across Ocean Drive and looked at the buildings and you did what Miami Vice did, which is give them makeup, give them nice costumes, give them good lighting, they suddenly looked fabulous. And everybody who saw the show that didn't live here thought the Art Deco district was glamorous and exquisite.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some features. They knew how to accentuate the features. In the lobbies, there was the terrazzo. Miami Beach's best Art Deco hotel feature is terrazzo floors, which are still colorful and beautiful. And also another interesting thing is the good guys always were in Art Deco. The headquarters of Miami Vice, the police, the Metro Miami-Dade Police Department, was an Art Deco building owned by the city on the Miami River in Miami at the 2nd Avenue drawbridge. It's now torn down. But it was a beautiful curved front Art Deco building, as gorgeous as anything in this district. And that was their headquarters. And it was uncanny how they would walk out the front door, walk 10 steps and be on Ocean Drive. It's like teleportation. But they were always walking down the sidewalks on Ocean Drive, but their headquarters was, 2 seconds away in the Miami River.
Well, there was no traffic.
They had a police escort across the
That's
country.
right. Fast cars. and
The
no
good
traffic.
guys were always in Art Deco, and the bad guys were always in the most fabulous 1980s modern architecture, the best houses and apartments that Miami had, the most wonderful architectural triumphs of modern design were where the drug dealers lived.
That's right.
Why? Because they had all the money.
What's interesting in that period is the neon. Now it's all disappeared. And the neon.
Well, I wanted to say, Miami Vice, when they filmed in Club Deuce, to answer more on your question, how shabby Club Deuce was, because it had been there since it had liquor license number 2 after Prohibition ended. And it looked so bad that Miami Vice redid the whole thing, gave it a facelift, and put neon in it,
Right.
which survives. If you go to Club Deuce, you'll see the neon, and it's from Miami Vice.
That was so beautiful. I wish I'd taken pictures of all the neon all the way up to North Miami, because it just doesn't work here with the salt there.
Yes.
It's very expensive.
it's
It's always some of it is out.
flickering
from the corrosion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering too, with your expertise, Barbara, how much of a role does, I think of people like Edith Head and all the greats who have had such a tremendous impact on fashion through the big screen, through the little screen. How much of a role does someone play in a TV show in terms of the look? How does that work?
Well, what was amazing about this show was that it was all men. And I mean, I can't remember any woman making any impression. I think there was a bit of black going on with women, but the men were wearing all the sort of pretty colors. And I do believe, I don't know who did the costumes, but I know it was Versace. And that was right at the beginning when he started, when he was only doing men's clothes before he started women's clothes.
Now, do they work with the director? Do they work, do you hear, we need somebody who will fit this type of outfit? How do they?
I'm sure that the stars had a lot to say about the way things looked and those huge shoulders. And I don't know who came up with this scrunching up there, because that was really cheesy, wasn't it? But it's coming back.
You do see that occasionally.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it really did, it did represent what a hot, steamy, sexy town this would be.
Yes.
And the other thing, the boobs were real back then, I think. Because I remember in the open, they kind of bounce, and I don't think they do that anymore. We have a question over here. Let me see if I can get a microphone to you, unless you would just like to shout.
Can somebody talk about the car culture? Miami, you walk out now, you can see cars, many, many, many beautiful cars. The TV show really highlighted cars and boats. Was Miami like that before? Were cars and boats always very, friendly
Fast.
here? Yeah, like fast. It was the most beautiful cars and beautiful boats.
Well, as Michael goes through his notes, we know that.
No, I have an immediate answer though.
Oh, good. Okay.
I have a whole bunch of stuff on what cars they use. The most interesting thing was that Ferrari sued Miami Vice. So that they were using a fake Ferrari. I never knew this. My immediate reaction about the cars, what was happening in Vice was to represent the glamour. It was what you could have if you had unlimited money. The fashion you could have, the cars you could have, the girlfriends and boyfriends you could have, the life on the beach, the life in the high-rise condo, and the fast cars, always going back to the fast cars.
Well, that was because it was true. The whole show was based on the culture of Miami being drug dealers. Miami had more money running through its Federal Reserve Bank than any other region of the United States. More cash still today comes to Miami than any other place in the United States. And the cash is because of drugs. And because they're not doing business by writing checks, it's cash. And so I'm just talking about cash. So those cars and that jewelry, the bling that they didn't call it then, but they do now, Miami Vice was reflecting that, and the drug dealings really came after I moved here, because I've lived here a long time. It started up about 79, 80. And I remember, I lived in Coconut Grove, and the Hotel Mutiny was the world headquarters of every drug dealer that ever lived. And Miami Vice, all they had to do was reflect it, hold a mirror up to it. And that's why they had
Hold the mirror down.
Mirror.
down.
We've got a question in the back here.
Patricia Kawaja, to Laurie's point about people from all over the world applying to be on the show, people in England were obsessed with the show. Everybody watched it, to the point where my very snobbish mother, I'll come to the point on that in a moment, I was in the Bahamas at the time, moved from the Bahamas to Fort Lauderdale. She throws me a coming home party back in London. Okay, now this is years later. The effect of Miami Vice with the Brits was it was really, really dangerous. People were shot down in the street. Seriously, that was the downside of all the pretty boy, costumes we saw. So I go home for the welcome home party. My mother grabs me and she says, "We don't tell the neighbors that you live in the M place." I said, "Mum, I'm in Fort Lauderdale." And she said, "Oh, it's the same thing." No, it's not. Anyway, so years later, here I am in the M place, 12 years, and I happen to live in the building that Don Johnson lived in when he was filming in Miami. He bought the Grand, which is next to the Herald, Harold Cohen and Herald people will know that. And he bought 3 units, knocked them into one. And Melanie Griffith also lived there. I don't know if that's where they met. But just a couple of trivia points relevant to it. So wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Going back to the cars, what was important that what struck me when I arrived here was the cigarette boats. Everybody had
Cigarette boats.
Every dealer had a cigarette boat because that was the way of transporting stuff.
On Fridays at WLRN, in our newsroom, we have a little discussion about what worked and what didn't work that week. And so that was the day that Howard Cohen's interview aired, and we peppered it with all the Miami Vice soundtrack we possibly could. And our America's editor, Tim Padgett, who also writes occasionally for the Herald as well, says, I just never bought that whole show because, living on a boat, a Testarossa, the cars, the this, the that, they were cops on a cop salary. And it's like, no, I don't think you understand here, because they set them up, the storyline, just as the real cops were being set up as undercover. You had to look the part, you had to dress the part, and you had to drive the part. Mm-hmm. So they had people that they were, I wonder, maybe that's it. Maybe it was the drug dealers that shoved up their sleeves to show they didn't have any weapons. All right, yes, go ahead.
You said that I had heard that the year's budget of the police force is the equivalent to 1 week's budget of Miami Vice filming. So given that, where did they find the money to fund these undercover cops in real life?
Well, it was drug seizures, forfeitures.
Yeah.
See, when that, and they kind of, in some cases, overstep their bounds.
There's a whole article about forfeitures. The drug laws that allowed forfeitures was actually the thing that made Miami Vice possible, because Brandon Tartikoff, the head of NBC, he said the forfeiture laws are what made the Vice thing plausible. That was actually a documented thought that went into the show.
But even when I moved here in 1991, you would see along the Miami River, you would see these big cigarette boats with the 3 engines in the back, the 3 220s. And suddenly they had the Miami Police Department name on them, or Miami-Dade, and these were taken from the drug dealers and went right to the police departments, because the argument was, just like the state troopers who have the Go Fast Dodge Chargers, the argument was, we can't catch the drug dealers, in a canoe. So
Right.
we're going to have a boat that's as powerful as they do. So it really upped the game for everybody, the police included.
I have a couple notes to comment on earlier questions that I finally found. I have so many notes, it takes me a while. Both Lori and Barbara referred to the style, the fashions, and Versace was mentioned, and he was indeed involved. And the other two designers that were involved, it says, were Vittorio Ricci and Hugo Boss. So that is
Then they were Versace ties. Yeah, at the end of the 5th season, the wardrobe department, I'm sure some of you will freak out when you hear this, the wardrobe department came to all of us. Our office was next door to the wardrobe department. And they came to all of us. They said, look, we can't ship all this stuff back. There's so much stuff. So come on in and take whatever you want. So I had a boyfriend at the time, and I took about 15 ties. And when my boyfriend came home, they were draped all over the couches and the chairs. He's like, what's that? I go, they're yours. And we have a whole closet of ties and T-shirts. And today when I was coming, I'm like, where are all those T-shirts? Are you kidding me? They're in storage, But yeah, because we didn't know what we had. I was just saying before the show, I said, I had about 100 scripts. And one day I had to clean out my house. They all went in the garbage. Right, who knew?
You had to read every script just to know who you were.
I had to read every script.
Very well, you were looking.
And then we had to look for, all the characters. And then we had to bring in a half a dozen choices for each character. And then we had to parade them in front of the producer and the director. And then they would say, yeah, let's see more. And it'd be like, ugh.
Lori was telling me that they rejected a lot of her people. And so they rejected everybody.
They would just, well, let's see more. I'd be like, oh, really?
Well, one of the fun things that I think we all enjoyed, and people started coming out of the woodwork, were the people who came up and said, I was an extra on Miami Vice. A guy I worked with was on Miami Vice when he was 12 and still has a photo of that. And Howard was on Miami Vice, and Paul Castronovo, the radio host for, what is it, you should know.
105.9 is it?
Yeah. Paul and Young Ron.
Right.
He was an extra, and I heard somebody describe it as it was Skipper Chuck for adults. You weren't anybody unless you got on Miami Vice.
It was fun. They dressed me up as a hooker once. I was like, oh, that's fun. And I got to be at a bar. I don't even know. But yeah, it was just a fun thing.
Go ahead.
I thought you had very imaginative casting. Very imaginative casting. You mentioned James Brown. I think I also remember Miles Davis. And there were a lot of other pop stars who appeared.
There were a lot of pop stars.
How did that happen? Was this something like Michael Mann would go to do, or you go to?
No, there was a New York casting director. Her name is Bonnie Timmerman. And they had a rule that they were only allowed to bring 5 actors from out of town. That was what their budget allowed. And so they would pick the top 5, like the more important guest stars of every episode. And Bonnie was responsible for finding those 5. And then everybody else was on me. But you see, back then, budgets were different. So they would put 20, 25 characters in every episode. Now it's half a dozen. People get paid more now, and budgets are different. So back then, it was a huge amount of casting, whereas compared to now, it's not as many characters for each episode of a television series.
And weren't some of the shows were really, the storyline would come from the music, oftentimes.
They would coordinate it. Yeah, they would coordinate the music with the show. We had a lot of great musicians. Phil Collins, and Phil even starred in one of the episodes, and Glenn Fry, and Yeah, we had great. I still to this day, every time I hear "You Belong to the City," it's like, ah.
I have the list of who starred in this show to complement all of our memory. Glenn Fry, Suicidal Tendencies, Willie Nelson, Ted Nugent, Frank Zappa, The Fat Boys, Sheena Easton, and Gene Simmons. That's only who starred in person in an acting role. There's another list that I'm not going to read. It has every band that played in the soundtrack.
Yeah.
That's like 45 bands. People like Pink Floyd and Peter Gabriel. It's an amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing.
list.
Well, Howard Cohen put the playlist in.
Yeah, right. You know the music.
I was and am a huge Carly Simon fan. An incredibly sexy woman. The camera loves her. I had read in the 80s that she was the original first pick to play Don Johnson's wife, but she declined the part because her kids were young at the time and living in New York. She didn't want to uproot them and raise in Miami. Is that true?
I did not hear that, but Sheena Easton was only on about 4 episodes.
And I thought she was awful.
So she wasn't. So it wasn't like you'd have to uproot your entire family and move for 4 episodes. I never heard that.
Well, maybe they thought Don Johnson's girlfriend would have been in every episode.
Maybe it was supposed to be more, and maybe they put the kibosh on it because they didn't like her. They did that with a couple of characters that were supposed to. Yeah.
The lovely blonde lady in the pink over there.
Probably our animal wrangler. You know, there's people. Yeah, no, they have. I mean, it's amazing on shows and on Vice. They have somebody for, like, they have the animal wrangler. They have the transportation guy who's in charge of getting all the cars. They have the marine coordinator who's in charge of the boats. I mean, there's one person in charge of, you know, everybody has something very specific that they do. Nobody does more than, you know, when people call me, they go, "Do you do animals?" I go, "I only do people." You know, that's my job, you know, and there's somebody else who does babies. I don't do babies, you know, and that's the same on a show like a Vice. There was the animal wrangler, and that's what they did. The alligator wrangler.
All right, we have a question in the second row.
Yes, can you tell me what the actual reaction was from the real drug dealers? Was there any pushback, or were they sort of away flat?
Loved it.
Me?
I knew so.
I think it was a hoot for them. I think they were flattered. I was instructed by certain people after I was introduced to certain drug dealers that I had to work with them and make them be a good actor, because I guess favors were owed. I don't know.
Well, they catered.
I
catering.
Huh?
Catering.
Yeah, I tried to stay as far removed from that stuff as possible. But I think those guys, it was very exciting for them. You know, there was a lot of drugs in that era. There really were. And like you were talking about the mutiny. I mean, when clients and actors would come in from out of town, you'd pick them up at the airport and they'd say, "Let's go to the mutiny first." And that was true in not just Miami Vice, but in.
You couldn't even give your car to the valet unless it was a Ferrari or a Porsche. There were no other, or a Lamborghini. There were no other cars. There was like 40 of them just waiting.
Yeah.
Every weekend, because I lived 2 blocks away.
And you never went in yourself.
Well, I actually never did.
We have a question, the gentleman in the black hat.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Michael, we have the host organization. Want to say a few words about MPBL and what membership might be to the organization?
That's my friend George Neri. He's the Associate Vice President for Cultural Tourism of the Greater Miami Convention and Visitor Authority. But more important, he's a retired Executive Director of Miami Design Preservation League, our host. The Preservation League worked hand in hand with Miami Vice because it promoted and made look glamorous the Art Deco district. And that's the job of our host, the Preservation League. And you should take an interest in the league. You should check George's waiving membership applications. So please support the league. That brings you this museum and brings you the Art Deco district. We protect it every day from being torn down, because there's no limit to how much money now wants to come in here and build buildings that have 40 stories, so
Right.
they can make more money.
Exactly.
And they will destroy the goose that laid the golden egg as soon as they can. And the league's job is to stop that. And it's not easy, but Barbara Capitman proved you can go up against anybody and win if you convince the people.
Another question about 4 rows back?
My name is Michael Russell, and my advice was TV lightning in a bottle. This is my question. Because of the success of the show, why didn't more shows end up being made here right after Miami Vice? It took a couple of decades, and then you got Dexter and Burn Notice, but why didn't those shows capture the same lightning in a bottle that Miami Vice did being made here?
You know what it is? It's like winning the lottery. And that's what, I mean, I personally have cast untold number of TV pilots that have shot in South Florida. And I remember shooting a TV pilot called The Keys or something. There was one called The Keys, there was one called Keys.
It was about the keys.
It was about the keys. and it went nowhere. And that producer went back to LA. It was a woman. She went back to LA, and we stayed in touch. And I said, what are you working on now? And she said, oh, there's some hospital show. I said, oh, what do they do? Oh, you know, it's a bunch of hospital people, and they're in the emergency room in a hospital and ER. And so why did the pilot she did here do nothing? And then she goes to LA, and same thing with another producer who did another TV show here called Moon Over Miami. They did a bunch of episodes, but it fell apart. And then he went to LA and he did something called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so I said, why couldn't you have done those here? You know, why did you have to do The Keys here? But if I may do a little horrible, shameless plug, but I have to do it.
It's been done.
Okay, okay. He did his, so I figure I'm going to. Let me just tell you what is going on now, because you brought up, and so I'm going to use that as to segue. What's going on in this country now is that states offer a film tax incentive. It wasn't like that in the Miami Vice days. In Miami Vice days, they shot in Florida, they shot in South Florida because of the weather, because it was beautiful, because it was wonderful to film here. Now, the reason they shoot in a locale is because of how much money that state is offering. The state of Louisiana and the state of Georgia are probably the two biggest states right now in this country. Florida, a few years ago, and I'm just telling facts, when Charlie Crist was governor, we got about a $265 million tax incentive that was supposed to cover a few years. During that time is when Burn Notice, The Glades, Magic City, Graceland, we also had Charlie's Angels, even though it didn't, you know, take off, it's still shot here. Plus movies like Dolphin Tale, which made over $100 million, Dolphin Tale 2. I worked on all of those with Charlie's Angels. I also did Iron Man 3, which came to shoot here for a little bit, Pain and Gain. And I can't tell you how many pilots I did. Amazing. The current governor, well, I'm just saying, just the facts. I'm not passing judgment. This past year gave us zero, not $5. The year before that, he gave us zero, not $5. Now, this coming year, Charlie Crist is running for governor. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that we see the impact that one television show had on this community. And it was massive. And every time a project comes to South Florida, I don't know the businesses that you guys are in, but if you're in anything, like you're a bartender, you're a waiter, you run a dry cleaning company, you drive a cab, you work in a hotel, you work in a pharmacy, you do production work, you're an agent, you know that every time a show comes to Miami, you're in the business and support services benefit. But because of what has happened in this country, because of film tax incentives, you have to offer it or people are not going to shoot here. And I remember when Michigan had a fabulous film tax incentive a few years ago, people said, oh, they're never going to shoot in Michigan. Yes, they will. They'll put on coats and they will shoot in Michigan. And that's what they did. I mean, if someone's going to give me almost 50% back on my dollar, I'm going to go. Because it's just a matter, it's intelligent. And talking about Miami Vice and seeing the impact it had on fashion, the impact it had on architecture, the impact it had on us as a community is huge. It's massive.
I'm somehow seeing Charlie Crist with his sleeves rolled up. Aqua, Bam-on kind of thing working there. Any more questions before? Okay, we've got two. You?
Brought it up. Do you think that it's really based on just who the governor is going to be, or is there something going on in Tallahassee that would be?
I think it's part of it. I mean, I think the governor's in charge of everybody.
Governor makes the budget.
Yeah.
But I heard that the people in Orlando, the studios there, they don't like the fact that everybody wanted to come here and shoot. They wanted more publicity. And so they lobbied the legislature not to renew it. Now, that's what I heard.
Well, Dolphin Tale and Dolphin Tale 2, which were two huge movies, which I was fortunate to work on, really boosted the economy over in Clearwater, because that's where the marina is. Clearwater's near Tampa. There's a lot of tourist stuff near Tampa. Tampa's near Orlando. People, when they come from the middle of the country for their week vacation, they can do Orlando, Tampa, and Clearwater as their vacation. And it brought millions and millions and millions of dollars to that area.
All right, let's take one final question.
Dennis Wilhelm had a question.
Can you say a few words about what it was really like here in America?
Couldn't you ask someone else a question?
Did he ask you?
He wants to know what it was like when they were filming. What you know?
What?
Well, what he wants us to say is there were no cars in the streets. They didn't have to get permits to film. They didn't have to close the streets because there were, did I mention there were no cars? You could go any place in Miami Beach and start filming and well, who was saying, was it in your interview, that they had to hire people? If they wanted more than 2 people on the street in Miami Beach in 1984, they had to pay them.
Oh, we did. We paid extras to have a crowd.
If you
seat.
wanted a crowd, you had to buy them. There was nobody was here. It was unbelievable. If you just came since 1995 or the year 2000, you can't even comprehend how unpopular and uncool Miami Beach was.
What do they say? If you rolled a bowling ball
Miami
down
Vice.
the street,
Yeah.
it hit nothing?
So that's what Dennis is trying to probe. We have the pictures to prove it. Pictures of the streets completely, not one car.
Amazing.
All of Ocean Drive for half a mile.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably all go outside and play in traffic. Head to the Clevelander. And thanks to our panel, Mike, Lori, Barbara. It has been a pleasure, and this has been such a fun 3-month project. Let's do it again in 30 years,
All right.
shall we?
10 more years. We'll show up in 10 years with that.